Hey, this is Everett DeMaurier with our sixth and last of our social distancing stories from the pages of The Invention of Everything. And since we opened up with a story about my mom, I figured we'd close with a story about my mom. And this one fits because it has to do with having enough and when we think we have enough. And during this time, it's real easy to focus on all the things that we're missing. We're missing sporting events, and we're missing, dinner at restaurants. We're missing socializing with friends, and maybe the pantry doesn't have everything that we want, but we definitely have all we need. We definitely have plenty. So this one, last one, is called The Understanding of Plenty. Just a few years ago, when my mom still lived at home, I used to visit her as often as I could at the house that I grew up in the Catskills of New York. Now, people were always, and I mean always, impressed by my mother's age back then. She was 92. And they were impressed even before you added in all the ands. She was 92 and still lived at home. She was 92 and still drove her own car. She still took care of her own bills, made her own meals, bought her own groceries, made muffins every Sunday for church, and had the most active social life of any of us. If you wanted my mother to do something with her, you had to choose either a Tuesday or Thursday, because that was the day she was the most flexible. At 92, my mother remembered every family member's birthday, including every niece, grandchild, and great-grandchild, but she could also go the other way and list birthdays of grandparents and great-grandparents and extended families. Every summer, we all traveled up the 9 hours to descend on her Walton, New York home for the weekend and to have this family reunion. Now, before you think of my mom as some sort of perfect human, it's important to know that she saw the world a little differently. And this has nothing to do with her age. This has everything to do with her. Here's a perfect example. When I was in my 20s, I was a young guy on his own, and I went to my parents' house for the weekend, and like a lot of guys, young on their own, I bought a bag of laundry with me. So I did the laundry, the weekend passed, and on Sunday night I drove home, said goodbye to my parents, and drove the 60 miles from Walton to my apartment in Binghamton, New York. So when Monday morning came, my mother walked into the laundry room and noticed that I had left some of my underwear in the dryer. Oh no, my mother thought. My child is out there with all his clean underwear. So Velma DeMaurier put the underwear in a clear, now this is a very important part of the story, clear plastic bag, and then drove the 60 miles to deliver the much needed underwear to her son. I had a small apartment at the time, and my mother knew exactly where this apartment was, and it provided several ideal places that one could discreetly drop off a clear plastic bag of underwear. In fact, I insisted on it before signing the lease. But this situation was much more urgent than that. So my mother headed straight to where I worked. And because I worked in a very large corporation, she drove around the building trying to find the main entrance. When she couldn't, she saw some people outside one of the buildings on a smoke break. "Do you know my son?" my mother said. Because there were more than 1,000 employees there, and I hadn't been there that long, the man said that he didn't know me. So my mother gave the man the clear bag of underwear and instructed him to give it to me. The poor guy walked the clear bag of underwear to the main building secretary, who walked to the second building secretary, who gave the bag to the sales secretary, who called and got the purchasing secretary to pick it up, who was given the bag and was nice enough to drop it off at my cubicle chair. In 20 minutes, my underwear saw more of that building than I had in the 2 years I had been there. Now, the fascinating part of this story is the fact that when you tell it to my mother, she looks at you like, yeah, what's the point? Her expression is there was absolutely nothing wrong with what she did. There was a job to do, and she did it. She got it done. Over. I have dozens of stories like this. Stories when she had a pond dug for us when we were small, and then a few hours later realized that, hey, ponds are dangerous. Fill it back in. Stories when I heard knocking on my apartment door and opened to find 4 firemen standing there because my phone had been tipped off the hook and my mother was convinced that the apartment had filled with gas. There are even stories about how my mother nearly drowned me trying to teach me how to swim. Now, my mother can't swim a stroke, but she figured she knew enough to teach me the basic skills. When it comes to my mother, we're dealing with someone who sees the world from a very unique perspective, which is also one of her greatest strengths. Every Thanksgiving, my mother and my mother-in-law come down to stay with us for a few days, and during this time, I take them both to this Amish grocery store that's nearby that has everything from craft items to discount canned goods, and both women love it. I have a great time going through every aisle with my mom as she picks out her canned goods. There's canned peaches that are 3 for $1. There's peas and carrots that are 50 cents a can, and she's an excited person. Now, when I take my mother home after this, she places her canned goods and her dry goods in her already stocked pantry, which brings me to the point. My mother has a kitchen full of canned goods and vegetables and soup cans and meat, and that's pretty much all she wants and all she needs. And every day, if she's not out to dinner with someone, she walks to her kitchen and opens a can of soup, or she warms up some stewed tomatoes. That's her dinner, and that's all she wants. She never, and I mean ever, walks into her kitchen and says, "There's nothing to eat here." She never, and I mean never, looks at the canned goods and says, "Ugh, I feel like pizza." And she never, and I mean never, feels like she's skimping or going without. The strange part is that my mother is a very particular person. She likes her coffee right out of the pot, plus 15 seconds in the microwave. She doesn't like grape jelly or chocolate. And the last time she visited us, when she asked for a washcloth, I gave it to her and she looked at me and said, "Don't you have a thinner one?" Who in the world has a preference for the thickness of a washcloth? My mother likes things a certain way, which makes her gratitude, her simplicity, and her appreciation all the more amazing. When there is snow predicted in her area, I always call and ask if she has enough food. I know what the answer is, but I just like hearing her say it. "Oh, I have plenty," she says. And she does. And we all do. In a world where we have 1,000 TV channels and there's nothing on, when we look at a full refrigerator and say there's nothing to eat, when we walk through a house with games and books and sporting equipment and paper and pens and say there's nothing to do, we need to think how Velma thinks. We need to see all the plenty. That was the understanding of plenty. Be safe.